Welcome to the channel. Love sci-fi? Subscribe, like, and share the journey. The first ships appeared at the edge of the solar system on a Tuesday morning, their massive hulls blotting out stars as they moved with purposeful intent toward Earth. Admiral Kate Morrison stood in the command center of Luna Station, watching the tactical display with growing unease. 47 vessels, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built, arranged in perfect formation. "Communications coming in," reported Lieutenant Tom Hayes, his voice tight with tension. "They're broadcasting on all frequencies." The main screen flickered to life, revealing a being that defied easy description. Tall and imposing, with chitinous armor plating and multiple appendages, the creature's voice resonated with mechanical precision through the universal translators. "I am Commander Vex of the Hegemony Fleet. Your species has been designated for pacification and integration into our collective. You have 72 of your planetary rotations to surrender unconditionally. Resistance will result in total planetary sterilization." The transmission cut abruptly, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Morrison felt her heart hammering against her ribs, but her expression remained steady. Around her, officers exchanged worried glances. "Sir," Hayes ventured, "our intelligence suggests the hegemony has conquered over 300 systems. No species has ever successfully resisted them." Morrison nodded grimly. The files were clear. The hegemony was an ancient alliance of races that had dominated this sector of the galaxy for millennia. They were technologically superior, numerically overwhelming, and utterly ruthless. Every civilization that had faced them had either surrendered or been wiped from existence. But they had never faced humanity. "Send word to Earth Command," Morrison ordered. "Full mobilization protocol, and get me President Chen on the secure channel." Within hours, emergency sessions convened in every major capital. The United Earth Council met in Geneva, while military commanders gathered via quantum-encrypted channels. The debate was fierce but brief. Surrender was discussed and unanimously rejected. General Mike Stone, head of Earth Defense Forces, addressed the global leadership with characteristic bluntness. "We've run the numbers. On paper, we don't stand a chance. Their technology is centuries ahead of ours. Their ships outnumber our entire fleet by 20 to 1, and they have weapons that can crack planets." President Elena Chen leaned forward. But they've never fought humans before," Stone replied. "Every species they've conquered has been part of their galactic community for thousands of years. They fight by established rules, with predictable tactics. They've never encountered a species that fights dirty." The room buzzed with murmurs of understanding. Humanity's military history was unique in the galaxy. Unlike other species that had developed space travel through peaceful cooperation, humans had reached the stars while still carrying the scars of countless wars. They understood violence in ways that civilized species had forgotten. Dr. Lisa Park, head of the Tactical Analysis Division, activated a holographic display. "We've studied their conquest patterns. The hegemony relies on overwhelming technological superiority and psychological warfare. They expect their enemies to recognize the futility of resistance and surrender." "They're bullies," Morrison observed from Luna Station via video link. "They've never had to adapt because they've never met real opposition." As night fell across Earth, cities that should have been panicking instead buzzed with activity. Factories retooled for wartime production, scientists worked around the clock on defensive technologies, and citizens volunteered for civil defense programs. The global military network activated protocols that had been theoretical exercises just days before. The hegemony had given humanity 72 hours to surrender. Instead, humanity gave itself 72 hours to prepare for the fight of its existence. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and outmatched in every conventional measure of warfare. But as Admiral Morrison watched the enemy fleet maintain its arrogant distance, she allowed herself a cold smile. The hegemony was about to learn that humanity had never been conventional. The attack came exactly 72 hours later, but not in the way the hegemony expected. As their fleet moved into Earth's outer system, they encountered what appeared to be a hastily assembled defensive line. A dozen human ships positioned near Jupiter's orbit, broadcasting surrender signals. Commander Vex observed the pathetic display from his flagship's command deck. His tactical officer, a spider-like being called Nyx, chittered with amusement. They barely managed to field a squadron commander. Their technology appears even more primitive than our initial scans suggested. Vex nodded approvingly. This was proceeding exactly as predicted. The psychological warfare phase was working perfectly. Show overwhelming force, give them time to contemplate their doom, then accept their inevitable surrender with minimal loss of hegemony resources. Move the fleet to optimal surrender acceptance formation, Vex ordered. Prepare boarding shuttles for the transfer of their leadership. As the massive hegemony vessels moved into position around the small human fleet, Captain Jack Rivera aboard the UES Defiance maintained constant communication with Earth Command. "They're taking the bait," he reported quietly. "All 47 ships are committed to the Jupiter intercept." Back on Earth, General Stone smiled grimly. Phase 1 complete. Initiate Phase 2. What the hegemony fleet didn't know was that the defensive squadron at Jupiter was entirely automated. Sophisticated. Drones designed to mimic human ship signatures while the real fleet remained hidden throughout the solar system. Humanity's first lesson to their would-be conquerors was about deception. The real attack began from 12 different vectors simultaneously. Stealth ships that had been drifting like debris suddenly roared to life, their fusion drives propelling them toward hegemony vessels at suicidal speeds. Nuclear mines disguised as asteroids detonated in carefully calculated patterns. And from the dark side of the moon, humanity's secret weapon revealed itself. The Luna cannon had been constructed in absolute secrecy over the past 3 decades. A magnetic rail accelerator built into the moon's crust, capable of launching projectiles at significant fractions of light speed. Its first shot punched through 3 hegemony ships before they could react. "Impossible!" Nix screeched as alerts flooded the command deck. "Our sensors detected no weapons of this magnitude, Commander." Vex felt something he hadn't experienced in centuries: surprise. The humans had somehow managed to hide a planet-killer weapon from their most sophisticated scans. But more disturbing than the tactical surprise was the strategy itself. These creatures were fighting like no civilized species ever had. The stealth ships weren't trying to disable or capture. They were ramming hegemony vessels with fusion bombs, accepting certain death to take their enemies with them. The nuclear mines were positioned not for maximum military effectiveness, but for maximum psychological impact, creating spectacular explosions that looked like dying stars. "Commander," reported his communications officer, "we're receiving multiple transmissions from the human vessels. They appear to be taunting us?" Indeed, across all frequencies, human voices crackled with defiant laughter and crude insults. Captain Rivera's voice cut through the chaos. "Welcome to Sol, you alien bastards. Hope you brought body bags. This wasn't warfare as the hegemony understood it. There were no formal challenges, no civilized protocols, no attempt at negotiation. The humans were fighting like wild animals, using every dirty trick and underhanded tactic they could devise. Within the first hour of combat, the hegemony lost 8 ships, more than they had lost in their last 50 conquests combined. But more importantly, they lost something far more valuable: their aura of invincibility. As emergency repairs began on damaged vessels and casualty reports flooded in, Commander Vex realized he was facing something unprecedented. These humans weren't just fighting back. They were fighting to win, regardless of the cost. "Sir," Nix reported with barely controlled panic, "long-range sensors are detecting massive energy buildups throughout their system. They have more weapons platforms than we initially calculated." Vex studied the tactical display with growing unease. The humans had somehow managed to turn their entire solar system into a weapon. Every moon, asteroid, and space station was potentially armed and dangerous. For the first time in his military career, Commander Vex began to wonder if the hegemony might have underestimated their enemy. The battle raged for 6 days, and with each passing hour, Commander Vex's confidence eroded further. The humans fought with a viciousness that defied all military logic, employing tactics that no civilized species would consider. On day 3, they had weaponized their own space debris. Centuries of accumulated orbital junk became a cloud of high-velocity projectiles, each piece tracked and guided by AI systems that turned space garbage into ship-killing ammunition. When a hegemony cruiser attempted to land troops on Earth's moon, They found the surface honeycombed with tunnels filled with human defenders who seemed to emerge from solid rock. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Foster led the lunar defense, and her tactics horrified the hegemony ground forces. Her troops used the moon's low gravity to leap impossible distances, appearing and disappearing like ghosts. They employed improvised weapons, psychological warfare, and showed no hesitation in sacrificing their own positions to eliminate enemy forces. "They're not fighting to hold territory," reported the hegemony ground commander to Vex. "They're fighting to kill as many of us as possible before they die." It's disturbing. But the most unsettling aspect wasn't the humans' willingness to die. It was their refusal to follow conventional military doctrine. When hegemony forces established what should have been an impregnable beachhead, human engineers simply collapsed the lunar caverns beneath it, entombing both sides in a tomb of rock and metal. Back on Earth, Dr. Park coordinated what she called asymmetrical response protocols. Every hegemony tactic was met with something unexpected. When they deployed energy shields, humans responded with kinetic weapons. When they used kinetic barriers, humans switched to exotic matter bombs. When they attempted electronic warfare, humans fell back on analog systems that seemed primitive, but proved immune to advanced hacking. "They're adapting faster than our combat computers can calculate," Nix reported to Commander Vex. "Every tactical adjustment we make, they counter within hours." This was humanity's second lesson to the hegemony: adaptability born from necessity. Unlike species that had developed advanced technology in peaceful conditions, humans had evolved their innovations through constant warfare. Every weapon they created had been tested against other humans who were equally determined to find ways to defeat it. General Stone coordinated the defense from deep within Cheyenne Mountain, surrounded by commanders who had studied every human conflict in history. "The hegemony fights like they're playing chess," he explained to his staff. "Predictable moves, classical strategies. We're playing poker, bluffing, misdirecting, and changing the rules as we go." The space battle had become a nightmare for hegemony forces. Human ships would suddenly accelerate to ramming speed, forcing enemy vessels to choose between being destroyed or breaking formation. Automated probes disguised as escape pods would detonate when picked up for analysis. Even human distress signals were weaponized. Rescue attempts led hegemony ships into carefully prepared kill zones. Commander Vex found himself fighting an enemy that seemed to view warfare as a creative exercise rather than a military operation. When his forces adapted to one tactic, humans would invent 3 new ones. When they established a successful strategy, humans would abandon it entirely and try something no rational mind would consider. On day 5, the humans demonstrated their most disturbing capability yet. A damaged Earth vessel, apparently crippled and drifting, was approached by a hegemony heavy cruiser for capture and analysis. The ship's entire crew had evacuated except for one volunteer, Captain Rivera, who had remained behind with enough nuclear material to create a star-bright explosion when the enemy ship came within range. "One ship, one life. One enemy vessel destroyed," Rivera had broadcast before detonating his ship. Not a bad trade. This philosophy, that individual sacrifice for tactical advantage, was not just acceptable, but admirable, ran counter to everything the hegemony understood about warfare. Their military doctrine emphasized preservation of resources and personnel. They fought to conquer, not to destroy. Humans, it seemed, fought to win, regardless of cost. By day 6, Vex's fleet had been reduced from 47 ships to 28. His ground forces were pinned down on Luna. His supply lines were under constant attack, and his officers were beginning to show signs of what human military historians would have recognized as shell shock. "Commander," his chief strategist reported, "we need to reconsider our approach. These humans are not behaving according to any known military parameters." Vex stared at the tactical display, watching as another hegemony vessel fell to human ingenuity. This time, a mining ship filled with metallic hydrogen that had somehow managed to ram his escort destroyer. The hegemony had conquered 300 worlds by demonstrating superior firepower and accepting surrender. They had never encountered a species that treated superior firepower as merely another problem to solve creatively. The turning point came on day 7, but not in the way anyone expected. As Commander Vex prepared for what he assumed would be the final assault on Earth itself, his sensors detected something that made his primary heart skip a beat. reinforcements arriving in the outer system, but they weren't hegemony reinforcements. "Commander," his communications officer reported with barely controlled terror. "We're receiving broadcasts from 17 different species. They're offering to assist the humans." The holographic display filled with alien faces, beings that the hegemony had conquered decades or centuries ago. The Zephyrians, whose crystalline ships had been shattered by hegemony might. The Corvani, whose proud warrior culture had been broken and absorbed. The peaceful Altarians, who had surrendered without firing a shot. Now they had all come to stand with humanity. Captain Anne Brooks of the UES Retribution received the alien delegations aboard her flagship. The lead Zephyrian diplomat, Teleran, spoke with the crackling voice of his crystalline people. "We monitored your battles, humans. For the first time in our history, we have seen the hegemony bleed. You have given us something we thought lost forever. Hope." The Corvani representative, War Chief Drak, was more direct. "Your warriors fight with honor, but more than honor, they fight with intelligence. You have turned warfare into art. We offer our ships and our lives to your cause." Dr. Park coordinated the integration of alien technologies and tactics with human strategy. The results were extraordinary. Zephyrian shield technology combined with human kinetic weapons. Corvani honor codes adapted to human psychological warfare. Altarian peaceful philosophies twisted into the most effective nonviolent resistance strategies ever conceived. But the most significant development wasn't technological. It was ideological. For the first time in galactic history, multiple species were actively cooperating against the hegemony, not out of fear or coercion, but out of choice. Commander Vex watched this development with growing alarm. The hegemony's power had always rested on their ability to isolate and conquer individual species. They had never faced a coordinated multi-species resistance, especially one led by beings who seemed to view impossible odds as merely another interesting challenge. "Sir," Nix reported, "intelligence suggests that 12 more species are considering joining the human alliance. The rebellion is spreading beyond our ability to contain it." The combined fleet that now faced the hegemony was still smaller and less technologically advanced, but it fought with a coordination and creativity that their enemies couldn't match. Human tactical doctrine spread through the alien ranks like wildfire. The idea that warfare was not about following established protocols, but about constantly adapting and innovating. General Stone found himself commanding not just human forces, but representatives from dozens of species who had never worked together before. The challenge was immense, but the solution was typically human. Instead of trying to create a unified command structure, he encouraged each species to contribute their unique capabilities while maintaining overall strategic coordination. "We're not trying to build a conventional fleet," he explained to the diverse group of commanders. "We're building something the hegemony has never seen before. A force that combines the best aspects of dozens of different military traditions." The battle that followed demonstrated this principle in action. Zephyrian ships used their natural invisibility to spectrum sensors to deliver human-designed kinetic strikes. Corvani warriors employed human psychological tactics to demoralize hegemony boarding parties. Altarian diplomatic protocols were weaponized into electronic warfare that convinced enemy ships their own computers were malfunctioning. But perhaps most importantly, the aliens learned humanity's greatest military secret: that rules existed to be broken, that innovation mattered more than tradition, and that the willingness to sacrifice everything for victory could overcome almost any disadvantage. Commander Vex found himself fighting an enemy that seemed to multiply its capabilities with each passing day. Every tactic his forces developed was quickly copied and improved upon by species that had once seemed thoroughly defeated. The hegemony's greatest weakness was being exposed: their reliance on predictable, overwhelming force against isolated opponents. "Commander," his chief strategist reported during an emergency council, "we must consider the possibility that this conflict cannot be won through conventional means." Vex studied the tactical display, watching as his remaining ships faced an alliance that grew stronger with each hour. 23 species now flew under human tactical command, employing strategies that defied every military manual in the hegemony database. For the first time in hegemony history, they were losing a war. The siege of Earth entered its third week, with the hegemony fleet reduced to 8 ships, trapped in a solar system that had become their prison. Commander Vex's remaining forces clung to defensive positions around Jupiter's moons, buying time while frantically calling for reinforcements that might never come. The humans had done something unprecedented. They had turned a conquest into a recruitment drive. Every day brought new species to their cause, each one carrying stories of hegemony oppression and human inspiration back to their home systems. The galaxy was beginning to stir with the first flames of true rebellion. Admiral Morrison, now commanding the combined fleet from the rebuilt Luna Station, faced a problem she had never expected. Victory was within reach, but at a cost that was becoming clear to everyone involved. Casualty reports, she requested from her aide, Major Davis. The numbers were staggering. Earth had lost 60% of its space-capable fleet. Luna's population had been reduced by half. 3 major cities bore the scars of orbital bombardment, and the economic cost of the war was beyond calculation. But the human casualties were only part of the story. Teleron of the Zephyrians had sacrificed his entire clan fleet to break the hegemony blockade. War Chief Drac had led a suicide run that destroyed 2 enemy dreadnoughts, but cost the Corvani their entire warrior caste. The peaceful Altarians had lost more people in 3 weeks of fighting than in the previous 1,000 years of their civilization. Dr. Park's analysis was sobering. We're winning, but we're also fundamentally changing the nature of galactic civilization. The old rules about warfare, diplomacy, and interspecies relations are being rewritten in real time. The transformation was visible throughout the solar system. Human military doctrine was spreading like wildfire among the allied species, but it was also being adapted and modified by alien military traditions. The result was something entirely new, a form of warfare that emphasized creativity, sacrifice, and cooperation over traditional advantages like technology or numbers. Captain Brooks, now commanding a mixed squadron of human and alien vessels, reported from the front lines. The enemy is adapting too, Admiral. They're starting to employ some of our own tactics. Desperation is making them more creative. Indeed, Commander Vex had begun implementing what he called human protocols among his remaining forces. Hegemony. Ships were now employing ramming attacks, improvised weapons, and psychological warfare. But there was a crucial difference. The hegemony forces were fighting to survive, while the Allied fleet was fighting to transform the galaxy. The philosophical implications weren't lost on humanity's leaders. President Chen addressed the Global Council from the damaged but still functioning UN building in Geneva. We went to war to defend our world, but we've accidentally started a revolution. The question is, what kind of galaxy do we want to create when this is over? General Stone was more pragmatic. Right now we focus on survival. Philosophy comes after victory. But victory, when it came, arrived in an unexpected form. On day 22 of the siege, Commander Vex requested a direct communication with human leadership. His image appeared on screens throughout the Allied fleet, no longer the confident conqueror who had demanded surrender, but a being who had learned hard lessons about the nature of warfare. "I wish to discuss terms," he said simply. The negotiations took place aboard a neutral vessel provided by the Altarians. Admiral Morrison led the human delegation, accompanied by representatives from each of the allied species. Commander Vex arrived with only a single aide, a gesture that spoke volumes about his reduced circumstances. "You have proven your point," Vex began without preamble. "The hegemony's methods are inadequate against unconventional opponents. We request safe passage from your system in exchange for non-aggression accords." Morrison studied the alien commander carefully. "You're offering to retreat?" "I am offering to acknowledge that some species cannot be conquered through traditional means," Vex replied. "The hegemony will reclassify humanity and its allies as unsuitable for integration." It was Teleron who spoke the words that echoed through the conference chamber. "But what of the hundreds of worlds you have already conquered? What of the species who still suffer under hegemony rule?" Vex's expression hardened. "That is not part of these negotiations." Morrison leaned back in her chair, considering. The easy path was clear. Accept the hegemony's withdrawal, rebuild Earth's defenses, and return to the status quo. But around the table sat representatives of species who had risked everything to join humanity's fight. And beyond the hull of this ship waited a galaxy full of oppressed civilizations. "Counter-proposal," Morrison said finally. "Complete withdrawal. of hegemony forces from all occupied systems, reparations for conquered species, and formal recognition of the new Galactic Liberation Alliance. The silence stretched for long minutes before Vex spoke. "You are demanding the dissolution of our empire." "We're demanding freedom," Morrison replied. "For everyone." The negotiations that followed would be remembered as the most significant diplomatic event in galactic history. What began as a simple ceasefire discussion evolved into a complete restructuring of interstellar civilization, with humanity serving as the unexpected catalyst for revolutionary change. Commander Vex found himself representing an empire that was crumbling from within. Reports filtered in daily of uprisings on hegemony worlds, inspired by news of humanity's successful resistance. Species that had been subjugated for centuries were rediscovering their warrior traditions, while peaceful civilizations were learning the art of creative resistance. "The humans have accomplished something we thought impossible," reported Vex's intelligence chief during a private briefing. "They have made rebellion contagious." Dr. Park led the human analytical team in documenting this unprecedented phenomenon. "Traditional conquest relies on demonstrating overwhelming superiority to discourage resistance," she explained to the Allied leadership. "By proving that the hegemony could be defeated, we've fundamentally altered the psychological landscape of the galaxy." The transformation wasn't limited to military affairs. Human concepts of individual rights, democratic governance, and species equality were spreading throughout the Allied fleet and beyond. The Zephyrians began experimenting with representative councils. The Corvani started questioning their rigid caste systems. Even the peaceful Altarians discovered that their diplomatic traditions could be powerful tools for social change. Admiral Morrison found herself coordinating not just a military alliance, but the foundation of an entirely new form of galactic civilization. The Liberation Alliance grew daily as more species joined, each bringing their own traditions and capabilities to the collective effort. "We're not just fighting a war anymore," she observed during a staff meeting. "We're building the framework for a new kind of interstellar community." The hegemony's response was predictably desperate. Unable to contain the spreading rebellion through traditional military means, they began employing increasingly extreme measures. Orbital bombardments of rebel worlds, biological weapons, and scorched earth retreats became common tactics. These atrocities only strengthened human resolve and galactic opposition to hegemony rule. Captain Brooks led relief missions to devastated worlds, while human engineers worked alongside alien specialists to develop new defensive technologies. The war was evolving from a territorial conflict into a battle for the moral foundation of galactic civilization. General Stone coordinated the liberation of the first major hegemony stronghold, the fortress world of Kepler Prime, which had served as a regional command center for over 200 years. The assault employed every lesson learned during the Siege of Earth, combining human tactical innovation with alien technological capabilities. "The enemy is fighting harder now," Stone reported after the victory. "They know they're not just losing territory, they're losing their entire way of life." Indeed, the fall of Kepler Prime had symbolic importance far beyond its strategic value. For the first time in hegemony history, a major fortress had been taken by force, its archives captured, intact, and its subjugated populations liberated. The psychological impact reverberated throughout the galaxy. Commander Vex, now commanding what remained of hegemony forces from a mobile fleet, faced an impossible situation. His empire was disintegrating from within, while facing external pressure from an alliance that grew stronger with each victory. The old certainties of hegemony supremacy had been shattered beyond repair. "Sir," his aide reported during their latest tactical briefing, 17 more sectors have declared independence. The rebellion has reached the core systems." The final negotiations took place not in neutral space, but aboard the liberated Kepler Prime. Representatives from over 100 species gathered in what had once been the hegemony's regional throne room, now transformed into a conference chamber where former enemies sat as equals. Morrison addressed the assembly with words that would be quoted throughout galactic history. "We didn't set out to destroy an empire. We set out to defend our home, but in defending our right to exist, we discovered that freedom is not something you can possess alone. It's something you must share to truly keep." The final treaty was signed by representatives of 347 species, formally dissolving the hegemony and establishing the Galactic Liberation Alliance as the governing body for interstellar affairs. The document enshrined principles that had never before been codified on such a scale. The right of species to self-determination, the prohibition of conquest-based expansion, and the obligation of advanced civilizations to protect rather than exploit less developed worlds. Commander Vex, representing the remnants of hegemony leadership, signed the treaty with visible reluctance. "You have won more than a war," he acknowledged. "You have rewritten the fundamental assumptions of galactic civilization." But even as victory was declared and celebrations began throughout the Allied worlds, thoughtful observers recognized that the real work was just beginning. Building a new form of galactic governance based on cooperation rather than domination would prove even more challenging than winning the war that made it possible. 5 years after the Treaty of Kepler Prime, Admiral Morrison stood once again in the command center of Luna Station. But the view outside had changed dramatically. Where once only human vessels had patrolled the solar system, now ships from dozens of species moved in comfortable formation, their crews training together in the tactical innovations that had made victory possible. The Galactic Liberation Alliance had grown into something unprecedented in galactic history. A truly voluntary confederation of species bound together by shared principles rather than conquest or coercion. The transformation hadn't been easy, and it was far from complete, but the foundation had been laid for a new kind of interstellar civilization. Dr. Park, now serving as the Alliance's Director of Cultural Integration, presented her latest report to the Joint Council. The human model of asymmetrical resistance has been adopted by 47 species, adapted by 63 others, and studied by every major civilization in the known galaxy. We've fundamentally changed how sentient beings think about conflict resolution. The changes were visible throughout Alliance space. Former hegemony fortress worlds had been transformed into educational centers, where species shared their military, scientific, and cultural traditions. The rigid hierarchies of the old empire had given way to flexible networks of cooperation that emphasized innovation and adaptation. General Stone, now retired but serving as a consultant on strategic planning, reflected on the broader implications of humanity's accidental revolution. "We taught the galaxy that rules exist to be broken, that innovation matters more than tradition, and that the willingness to sacrifice for others can overcome almost any advantage. But the aliens taught us something too. That our way of fighting, our willingness to break rules and try the impossible, was actually just one valid approach among many. The fusion of human tactical thinking with alien philosophical and technological traditions had produced remarkable results. Zephyrian crystal ships now employed human-style unpredictability algorithms. Corvani honor codes had been adapted into complex systems of interspecies diplomacy. Altarian peaceful resistance techniques had been weaponized into the most effective non-violent protest methods ever developed. But perhaps the most significant change was philosophical. The old galactic order had been based on the assumption that advanced civilizations naturally dominated less developed ones. The Alliance operated on the revolutionary principle that technological advancement created an obligation to protect and nurture emerging species rather than exploit them. Captain Brooks, now commanding an integrated fleet of human and alien vessels, reported on the latest liberation mission. The hegemony remnants are still out there, still trying to rebuild their empire in the Outer Rim territories. But every world they approach has heard the stories of Earth's resistance. Most don't even bother to fight. They just request alliance, membership, and protection. The speed of the transformation had surprised everyone, including humanity's leaders. What had begun as a desperate defense of Earth had become a galaxy-wide revolution that touched every aspect of interstellar civilization. Trade, diplomacy, science, and culture had all been fundamentally altered by the introduction of human concepts of individual rights and species equality. Former Commander Vex, now living in exile on a neutral world, had become an unlikely scholar of the changes he had witnessed. His writings on the human phenomenon were studied throughout the galaxy as attempts to understand how a single species had managed to overturn thousands of years of established galactic order. "They did not conquer us through superior technology or overwhelming force," he wrote in his most famous essay. "They conquered us through superior ideas, They proved that the willingness to die for freedom was more powerful than the ability to impose slavery. They demonstrated that cooperation freely given was stronger than obedience compelled by force. President Chen, now serving her second term as Earth's representative to the Alliance Council, addressed the anniversary gathering with characteristic directness. 5 years ago, we were a single world facing impossible odds. Today, we're part of a galactic community that includes over 400 species. We didn't set out to change the galaxy. We just refused to surrender our right to exist as free beings. The celebration that followed was unique in galactic history. Hundreds of species gathering not as conqueror and conquered, but as equals who had chosen to stand together. The diversity was staggering. Crystalline beings who communicated through harmonic resonance, energy creatures who had no physical form, and ancient machine intelligences that had witnessed the rise and fall of dozens of empires. Yet, they were united by principles that had emerged from humanity's desperate struggle for survival. The right to self-determination, the obligation to protect the weak, the belief that diversity of thought and approach was strength rather than weakness, the understanding that true security came not from dominating others, but from building communities where all could thrive. As Admiral Morrison watched the celebrations from Luna Station, she reflected on the question that historians would debate for centuries. Had humanity really saved the galaxy, or had the galaxy saved itself? Once someone finally showed them it was possible, the answer, she realized, didn't matter. What mattered was that for the first time in recorded galactic history, an empire had fallen not to a more powerful conqueror, but to the simple idea that sentient beings deserved to be free. The hegemony had ruled through fear and the demonstration of superior force. The alliance governed through hope and the promise of mutual protection. It wasn't a perfect system, no form of government ever was, but it was something new, something that offered possibilities that had never existed before. Earth had taught the galaxy that even the most overwhelming odds could be overcome through creativity, courage, and the willingness to sacrifice for something greater than oneself. In return, the galaxy had taught humanity that their greatest strength, their refusal to accept that anything was impossible, was a gift that could transform not just themselves, but every civilization they encountered. The war that had begun with humanity's desperate fight for survival had ended with the birth of a new kind of galactic civilization, and at its heart was a simple truth that had taken the galaxy by surprise. Sometimes the most powerful weapon in the universe is the absolute refusal to surrender what you know is right. The day war found Earth, humanity had indeed proved everyone wrong. But in doing so, they had given the galaxy something far more valuable than victory. They had given it hope.